Do you know how it feels when you discover that you actually like a genre of games that you always kind of ignored? My experience with open world racing games has been pretty much limited to the time I rented Test Drive Unlimited like 15 years ago, my love of Driver San Francisco, and I think that's it. I've played other games with racing in it as a side mission, like the modern Grand Theft Autos, but as a genre itself, I never really tackled the open world racing game. That is until now. But of course, I had to wait until I could play these on a tiny portable screen. I don't mean to diminish the genre, but growing up surrounded by high school boys during the Xbox 360 era, all I heard about were FIFA, racing games, military shooters, and Assassin's Creed, and these were all by the types of people that like sports, cars, war crimes, and parkour. Meanwhile, I liked none of those, and was routinely called slurs because of it. Fun times. I just ignored that primal part of my brain that wanted to speed through maps and cause as much destruction as possible, without taking off my seatbelt of course. But I have now finally let that part of myself overindulge itself, as I have 3 games to look at today. I'll be looking at these in an order that makes sense to me, even if it's not the initial release order or even the re-release order. Criterion Games, they're best known for the Burnout games and for making several of the Need for Speed games, 2 series I have little to no familiarity or knowledge of. I am aware some of the games I'm looking at today, like Burnout Paradise and Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012, are not the most representative of what these series are initially about, especially in the case of Burnout, where I can see the fan divide all the way from over here, so let's just preface all this by saying this is my only exposure to the series thus far. I am sure the original and earlier games are great, and I look forward to playing them, and I am all too familiar with what it's like when you enjoy early titles in a series and everyone else only talks about the sequels. I get it, but I'm only talking about the sequels. All 3 of the games I'm looking at now, Burnout Paradise, Need for Speed Most Wanted, and Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, have a lot in common, especially those first 2 titles, so I'll discuss their similarities before going into each one's pros and cons. These games are primarily about street racing, but also have a focus on ramming into other cars and destroying them, while also avoiding getting your own car destroyed in the process. These games heavily reward near misses and other reckless driving as they boost your nitrous, and they also reward going into the sound settings so you can hear the time capsule of licensed music better over the sound of engines revving and tires burning. All 3 of these games do have the option to free roam, but they all go about it in different ways that I'll soon discuss. Burnout Paradise, in terms of a free roam experience, is easily the best of these 3 games, and while it's not my favourite of these games, it is by far the most unmatched in this regard. This is a giant playground where fun can be had at every corner, quite literally, as each intersection provides a new challenge and each road is a time trial. While the Need for Speed titles are better in some areas, I cannot downplay how good Burnout Paradise is in this one field. It never has any downtime, every second can be fun, and this isn't just in regards to the actual challenges. There are shortcuts to find and billboards to crash into, and you don't unlock cars willy-nilly, they'll be available for you to find on the road as they speed on by you. You have to keep up the pace, crash into them, and avoid making any wrong turns as you are speeding uncontrollably. Every second of this game can be contributing to one of your personal goals, and I love it. This isn't the deepest racing game, but it's so fast and frantic I have a hard time caring. You'll keep getting progressively better handling and quicker cars to drive, which all excel in different areas like speed and durability, though this curve can be quite ruined with all the built-in extras that were originally DLC in the original release. Just have the willpower not to break the game and you'll be great. The cars you get here have a lot of customization available, which does help to give me more attachment, even if I do find myself switching vehicles quite often. Vehicle switching and customization can only happen at specific junkyards scattered across the map, but as you'll be going so fast, there won't be much downtime between them. Because the map is yours to play with, nothing is off limits during the races. Go wherever you want, it doesn't matter as long as you get to the endpoint. These are all simple A to B races. There's no laps, no checkpoints, just get there and the game does not care how. You do get suggestions for the ideal route thanks to the little turn signals blinking, but not only can you barely see it, you have such little time to react that you'll probably just improvise and make your own way there. It's very plausible you'll take a less conventional means to the end goal, but the game is happy to support it. The other races don't all take the same route either, which can keep races feeling exciting. In addition to races, we have some other challenges here to complete, like destroying a certain number of other speeding cars, or my two favourites, one of which is to get to a certain destination without your car being destroyed, as countless cars have it out for you specifically, and also the stunt challenges where you have to rack up a number of points of erratic driving, jumps, and anything else you can achieve. Those last two in particular highlight just how fun a driving game this is. I love it as a driving game, not necessarily a racing game, and there is a bit of a distinction. I personally prefer a little more structure in my races, and this game isn't for me in that regard. It's fun, but the ability to go anywhere can be a little overwhelming to me personally, and while map familiarity does help with this, and it did become less of an issue the more I played, and I can also see it being someone else's preference, it's not mine personally. As you complete each of these races, your driver ranking will increase, which does help make my brain feel happy because I like rankings going up and I'm very easy to please. However, there was a game which was basically Burnout Paradise with structure in its races, and this is Need for Speed Most Wanted. I'm playing the Vita version, which is honestly an amazing port considering the hardware available. Obviously compared to the console versions of the time, or what Switch ports are like now, this does look lacking, but this is a 2012 handheld title. The Vita was capable of doing games that if nothing else looked like their bigger console siblings, but were still shorter games overall. Whenever we saw full console ports, they were usually for things like fighting games, JRPGs, or smaller titles in general, which are still very impressive and I do not want to downplay them. But getting such a fast and fluid, new open world racing game that wasn't compromised for a handheld was an amazing prospect for the time. And while this game might look a little chunky when blown up to a big screen, it's beautiful on the screen this game was originally made for. This is the least beautiful of the three games I'm looking at by far, but I find it the most impressive from a technical perspective. Playing both these titles side by side would show you just how similar they are, but their differences are very obvious and apparent throughout, whether that's for the good or the bad. The first one of these I noticed immediately is the car handling. Everything is much weightier and more deliberate. Your top speed won't be nearly as fast as it is in Burnout Paradise, nor will you be able to maneuver through traffic and tight corners as effectively. I would never call this a realistic game, but it is more realistic than its predecessor. Despite the cars feeling entirely differently, the actual game itself is still very similar. Shortcuts and billboards are still the same. You're climbing up the rankings by completing races, and you'll be able to unlock some new cars by ramming into them enough until they're totaled. However, that last one only applies to a fraction of the vehicles you'll be unlocking. Most of them are just sitting there in the open world parked and waiting for you, and you can switch into them instantly by pressing a button. However, whenever you complete a Most Wanted race, which are usually your reward for getting enough points, you'll have a one-on-one race of a specific car, and presumably a driver, and once you beat them, you get to enact your carnage and destroy it and take home what's left. These feel more like boss fights and are a fun reward for climbing up the ratings. Finding the rest of the cars encourages exploration as well, and I do enjoy it, so I feel satisfied that I have two different ways to collect vehicles here. However, the cars themselves are another difference here. We can't really customize their appearance or paint job at all beyond the random one assigned whenever you repair it, but we do get to upgrade the stats of each individual car. However, this itself is done in a linear sense instead of a more creative one. Whenever you get a car, they're basically just a normal car, they don't even have nitrous available. But as you win races with that specific car, you'll get things like nitrous, tire customization, and so forth, which would improve stats. It incentivizes me to use a car for longer periods at a time, and they don't feel like as small a stepping stone like they did in Burnout Paradise. I grow more attached to them, even if there's less I can customize. With these cars, I can win races, which I find much more enjoyable than I did in Burnout Paradise. These utilize the map design of a city wonderfully, but these are specific tracks you'll be racing through. You can't go off course and make your own route, you have checkpoints and laps to worry about here. They're all so well designed and varied, and the city's design is built with the heavier turning in mind, so you'll still be speeding through a larger city without having to worry about the handling. Another difference between these two titles is the fact that the police are present. This isn't a lawless city where driving erratically is just an everyday occurrence. It's a city where driving erratically is expected, but the police give you a little chase for being a little bit naughty. This not only makes the racing more fun, but the driving between races a bit more exciting, which is good because that's easily the worst part of the game here. Races are further apart from each other and you'll have a lot more downtime. And considering the vehicles aren't as fast and aren't as good at quickly maneuvering, this is a lot less of a chaotic experience like Burnout Paradise. This is a big open world where you're allowed to have fun in permitted areas only. Please drive 8 kilometers to the next permitted fun zone. While the races can be amazingly crafted experiences, complete with police intervention and tire spikes as you swerve through the elaborate landscape, you'll just as often find yourself commuting to the fun. This is the biggest problem with Most Wanted. I love a lot about this game. I find it to be better than Burnout Paradise in so many ways, but I just want a game that lets me have fun and hop into it quickly. But thankfully there is a game that allows me to do that. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. This is what happens if you take the best elements of Most Wanted and condense them into their own package. But with that said, we are so far removed from the creativity of Burnout Paradise. This is technically an open world, but you'll never use it. The game expects you to use the menu to select races. It's simple and it's elegant, and there will be no driving in between the moments of fun here. All you really have is the specific set challenges to worry about. There are no billboards to worry about, and cars are rewarded to you after completing challenges. If you bother to open up the free drive mode, you'll get to witness just how little there really is to do outside of the specific challenges. And that's not a bad thing. This game is all the highlights of the game that I mentioned previously with none of the bloat. But that also means there is inherently less to do, and some people might really want freedom more than tightly focused objectives. For me, however, I love this, and unlike me, this is all fun and has no fat. Well, the spine of the game notwithstanding, that actually makes me angry. This game's map goes in a different direction than the others. The previous games were full of tight corners as you drove through the city streets. This is, however, long straight roads with wider turns throughout the more rural areas. But what beautiful rural areas we have here. Snowy mountains, forests, the beach, cliffsides, the desert, and more. Instead of going through a more believable city layout, this brings in as many biomes as it can and crams them all together into a varied environment. This game brought back a lot of memories of my time traveling through the United States, and I loved it. It made me feel really nostalgic. I could go the rest of my life without another game set in a fictional version of Los Angeles, but I really desire to see the beautiful nature of North America, even as I drive past at ludicrous speeds with vehicles that pollute relentlessly. This is added to with the time of day and the weather being dictated by the challenge you're on, so the game can craft a specific mood for you. It may be a stormy night in the forest or a bright sunny day in the desert. The game's tone is set thanks to this, and this is something you can lose with more open experiences. But the game isn't just about speeding through these beautiful locations. We actually play on 2 different sides of the law. We can play as the bad guys and the illegal street racers, and swap between these 2 different perspectives on the mission selection screen. Both sides are equally as fun to play for different reasons. The street racing is what you'd expect for the most part, although we have much more customization than you'd expect, and we use these cars to compete in races and time trials across these vistas. The cops, on the other hand, also have time trials, however theirs are much more punishing, as collisions add seconds to your timer, meaning you have to be fast and flawless to get the top score. Instead of racing, we have to break up the races instead, which basically means we have to knock out every racer before they get to the finish line themselves. This is a really fun take on both races and the knockout challenges from Paradise, and this is more effectively communicated to us, the player, as we actually now see health bars above the cars themselves. We're also equipped with tools like tire spikes, EMPs, and roadblocks to help inconvenience for racers, which is satisfying after being on the other side of those for so long. In the top of the screen as well, we also have a mirror which highlights cars behind us, which is a wonderful quality of life feature. It not only helps to show us cars that may be overtaking you, but it's invaluable with the road spikes we can place directly behind us. The driving feels much better than it did in Most Wanted while still being on the much heavier side, but this is because we have even wider turns than we had in Most Wanted, so the game's map design is much better accommodated to the weightiness. All 3 of these games are must-plays, not easily recommend them. However, Burnout Paradise easily wins if you want a more open and chaotic experience, and Hot Pursuit is the ideal choice if you prefer set races and a tighter focus. While I do love Most Wanted and I do prefer it to Burnout Paradise, it's a game that doesn't commit as hard to either types of these extremes, so it's a great choice if you're non-committal to either one of those or just a centrist. It's a lesser open world than Burnout Paradise and less arcadey blast than Hot Pursuit, but it's still a great game and it's better than those two games in certain aspects as well. Either way, all three of these games are essential and I'm glad I finally got into the genre, especially now that I can play all three of these on handhelds that I can play from the toilet.